transforms through this body. Number two is there's a fixed energy budget, right? All of us have a fairly fixed energy budget to deal with. And for example, if you want to have more energy to do more podcasts, to write more articles, to be more creative, the solution is not eating more, because there's this fixed energy budget. And if you overload the system, you feed it too much food, especially too much sugar, it's really hard on the system. And then the system, like an electrical system, you jack up the voltage, right? And then the system starts to overheat. So inflammation is this overheating. There's too much energy in the system, and or the cells are burning too much energy, and they need to kind of tell other cells. Those signals we call inflammation, cytokines. Mm-hmm. So there's a fixed energy budget that you have to deal with. And over time, the organism does a lot of finessing and adapting to kind of try to preserve this energy budget.
And that's somewhat linked to stress, I guess, which is, I read your work and it talked about how stress was basically just like an overconsumption of energies. It's requiring loads and loads and loads of energy.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll talk about that too then, because I think stress is a really important one. What's the third?
The third one is life is resistance. In order to be alive, in order to grow, to learn, to transform, right? Change your views, you need resistance to go through some resistance. Mm-hmm. You need energy to go through some resistance, right? If energy just flows and there's zero resistance, then there's no possible transformation. So if life was always easy mm-hmm. and you never faced any challenge, any stress in your life, then it would just remain as is, right? And it would be very boring. And from first principles physics, like we know this to be true, at a number of levels. But for example, the sun, this beautiful nuclear reactor in the sky, shoots energy, right, as photons. So light is a form of energy. And as long as light, just goes and photons travels in outer space, photon will remain photon. Light energy will remain light energy until that light energy hits a green leaf, right? And the green leaf basically breaks or stops the photon in its path. So it offers a constraint, right? It offers resistance. So when light energy faces resistance, now it can be converted. And that's the basis of making food. That's how nature makes food. It crystallizes energy from sunlight into molecules. Life, plants crystallize light energy into carbohydrates. And then those are transformed into the different kinds of food that we eat. We need resistance for energy to transform into something meaningful.
So what has mitochondria got to do with all of this?
Mitochondria are basically little resistors, right? And they are what allows the flow of energy through the system.
Have you got a picture of, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is an image of a mitochondria?
A mitochondrion, O-N is a singular. And mitochondria is plural. Okay. Yeah. So this is a mitochondrion, and there's about 1,000 of these in each of your cells.
Okay.
And there's about 5 trillion cells in your body that have a nucleus and that have these beautiful mitochondria. And what you see here, these little wings, these are called cristae. And the cristae is where the food you eat end up and where the oxygen you breathe end up as well. So this is where the electrons are flowing. There's like little electrical circuits here. And as the electrons are flowing, the mitochondria become charged like little batteries. So effectively, a mitochondrion like this has all of these sites of oxygen consumption and food consumption, and then that gets transformed into a little charged battery. And once the battery is charged, the mitochondria can use that charge to make ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is kind of the cellular energy currency. If a cell wants to contract, right, a muscle cell wants to contract in the gym, it needs ATP. So it calls upon the mitochondria, says, I need ATP. And then the mitochondria gets to work and then flows electrons, consumes some food, burns some oxygen. That's why you get out of breath. Right? So when you get out of breath is because the mitochondria are using the oxygen and calling for more oxygen. What we've been discovering is that mitochondria do a lot more than just making ATP.
Okay.
They use their energized state to produce signals, to receive information and then to produce signals.
Oh, so they're talking to each other?
They're talking to each other.
And what are they saying?
It's a whole collective, and they're talking to each other, kind of monitoring what's happening, not only inside the cell, but outside the cell. So on the surface of mitochondria, all along, there are little receptors for all sorts of signals that tells this mitochondrion, is there enough energy? Are we running out of energy? Is there a stress hormone here? Should we be getting ready for, something dangerous? So mitochondria are like a little distributed brain, right? So they're like the intracellular brain.
Am I right in thinking that they used to be bacteria?
They are. Yeah, they did. Yeah.
What is that story? Because I think someone said that to me before on the show, that our mitochondria are actually bacteria that from prehistoric times or something.
So the story is about 1.5 billion years ago that there was two different types of bacteria. One type was able to use oxygen to transform energy, right? So it could fuel on oxygen and other food substrates. The other type could not. It was anaerobic. And the anaerobic bacterium was probably a little bigger and it had like a few more genes. And it could only ferment its food and kind of fermenting the food, spitting out, like lactate or like yeast does. And what happened is the big one either engulfed the small one, right? Or maybe the small one kind of infiltrated, colonized the big one. Mm-hmm. And the story goes that this basically gave a whole bunch more energy to the big cell. That's one perspective. And then with more energy, what can you do? You can evolve more complexity. The version I favor, based on the evidence we have, is that when mitochondria came in, and then there was this new structure, this symbiotic relationship, mitochondria basically gave the ability of the cell to perceive the environment in a different way and to compute information in a different way. So maybe the coming of mitochondria into this big cell made the big cell social. Because before this event, most of the evidence says that cells were asocial. They were little bacteria foraging for themselves and, kind of operating from a very selfish perspective, just trying to replicate, just trying to survive. When mitochondria came in, it gave those cells a different view on life. And they're like, ooh, we could work together. How about you become a cell that gets energy, right? Mm-hmm. And I become a cell that moves, right? So then you're the gut and I'm going to be the muscle. And then together, those two cells can do a lot more, right?
And fast forward a couple billion years and here we are.
Here we are, yeah. And that led to, bodies with organs, the liver feeds the rest of the body, the heart keeps things flowing, the brain kind of computes and plans. So that's division of labor. And it started with the mitochondria.
You talked about energy resistance. I've heard you say that most diseases or disorders can be explained by understanding energy resistance. Give me a disease that's linked to energy resistance.
The clearest is what we call insulin resistance or diabetes, right? Diabetes affects millions in the world. Fundamentally, diabetes is a disease of energy resistance. So if the resistance is too high... Because you have... too much energy pushed onto the system.
Too much sugar, glucose.
Yeah, exactly. Or if the mitochondria are impaired, right, and they can't flow energy, then the energy is kind of stuck. It faces greater constraints. It's like it wants to go in that direction, but then there's a barrier, and then another barrier. It's like water flowing, right, nice and smooth, and then there's like a dam, right? And if the dam has zero openings, right? Then the water accumulates and then there's high pressure. And then at some point, the water accumulates and ends up flooding the landscape and then damaging things. So it's a bit like the same thing. If now you open floodgates on the dam, right? And then you can use that energy to make electricity, for example. You use the movement of the water to transform this into electricity. That's basically what the mitochondria do. And if you move and you're physically active, now the flow of energy through the mitochondria can transform into work, right? And to speed, and to movement, right? And to lifting.
Is this linked to cancer at all? Because it sounds, I don't know much about cancer, but cells dividing out of control, seemingly randomly.
Yeah, I think that there's a very good chance, if you look at the biology of cancer and what scientists call the hallmarks of cancer, there's like a 10-item flywheel of these are the core features of cancer. All of those features have some relationship, some very direct, with increased energy resistance. Right. So if energy can't flow smoothly and a cell is burning too much energy and it doesn't flow energy through the mitochondria, which is what cancer cells do. Cancer cells ditch their mitochondria and they revert back to this ancestral cell that didn't have mitochondria. It was anaerobic. It was spitting out lactate. And we don't really know why cells do this. It's called the Warburg effect. And the Warburg effect is when a cell, in the presence of oxygen, right? If it wanted, it could use oxygen, flow electrons through mitochondria and transform energy and live a nice social life, like every cell in this social collective does in the body. What cancer cells do is they say, I'm not going to use my mitochondria, even if there's oxygen, even if my mitochondria can respire. And by doing this, it seems like cancer cells revert back to this ancestral cell, right? That just cares about itself.
The antisocial cell.
Yeah. Then the organism and the tumor will try to make more blood vessels around it. Right? It's called angiogenesis. So it's like the cancer cell trying to decrease energy resistance. It says, bring me more oxygen.
So it's kind of like there's a sort of alien all of a sudden that decides it no longer wants to work with the rest of the organism and that it's going to be selfish and demand more and more resources for itself. Mm-hmm. And it multiplies itself with equally selfish little aliens.
Yeah.
And then the body responds by listening to it and giving it more resources. Is that what you're saying? Why do the blood vessels surround a cancer?
Yeah, it's the cancer calling for, more energy.
Okay.
Yeah. So energy resistance is the product of two things, is how much energy is being demanded, right? Like how much power is being deployed in the tumor, for example, or in the working muscle. And then how much energy can flow through the system. That's like the equivalent of current in an electrical system. So if there's a lot of demand, right, a lot of power is being generated or a lot of activity is happening like in a cancer cell, but there's not enough flow to support that activity, then that increases resistance.
So is there any understanding as to how those kind of cancers are caused? Like what causes that moment where, you talked about the Warburg effect. What causes that?
The cancer community used to think that the main driver for cancer was genetic mutations. But there's an emerging perspective that changes in metabolism, changes in the way electrons flow through this energetic circuitry, through the mitochondria, can actually drive the instance of a new cancer cell. And then when a cell becomes cancerous, ditches its mitochondria, it goes back to this selfish state, and then it makes more of itself.
And it tries not to die. Explain that.